Okay, so this is my painting for the week. This week I chose a simple Asaro head. And the reason I chose an Asaro head was I felt it sort of naturally built on this progression that I've been working on with my other painting projects over the last few weeks. I started with a simple ball and focused on adding values to communicate how light would interact with that object. The next week I upped the complexity a little with a composition of different shapes all together and working on form and values once again to communicate how light would interact with this piece. So the Asaro head is in its whole and its essence a more complex shape than like a ball or a cube, even though the individual features of the face are very simple. So I wanted to put something together that would be a little more complex in shape and then work on adding values and hopefully get something that looks like a head. As for my progression with this piece, I think what I did was fairly simple. I started with a sketch. I took that sketch and used it to add in values. And finally, I went back and I refined those edges. So the biggest problem I had in this process was easily my proportions. The very first sketch I laid down looked okay, but you could immediately tell that something was off. And it wasn't until I had thrown up my reference image of the Asaro head that I realized just how bad my proportions were. So what I ended up doing was using the selection tool and kind of restructuring the head a little bit to give me some better proportions. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to actually go through with that because I felt like that was cheating in a way. But in the end, I decided that I had already seen that my proportions were bad and that I needed to work on it. And then moving forward with this piece, I would just use the one that ultimately would give me some better proportions. So that's what I did. In terms of adding value, that was sort of a paint by numbers, so I can't really comment on whether I've made progress in that way. I feel like that step was just very basic. I can say, however, that if you get a good sketch, that's easily the most important part of this type of a workflow. So if you have a good sketch, the rest of the project becomes very easy because it is kind of a paint by numbers. So in the future, I need to spend more time really focusing and double checking and triple checking my proportions and get that down very solid, and then everything becomes easy. And then maybe if I have to, I can kind of tweak things with the selection tool, but if I can avoid it, I think that's even better. So the things that I liked, I think the ears turned out really well. I was expecting them to be kind of bad because they're a little bit more complex, and they're certainly not perfect, but I kind of like the way I approached them. I wasn't thinking about how do I create an ear. I was thinking, here's a triangle of highlight, and here's a shadow that needs to run up this way. And it wasn't until I kind of got halfway through the ear that I started to see how those colors and values, I should say values, gave me the form of an ear. So it was a little bit backwards for me, and I've never thought about it that way. So it was enjoyable, and even if the ears aren't perfect, I'm happy with how they turned out. So another thing that I'm happy with is how the edges turned out. So within this workflow, I laid down the sketch, I put in the values, and then I removed my sketch layer and immediately saw that I needed to go back and refine the edges of this picture. And so what I did was I collapsed all of my value layers together, and then I made a single layer and I went through and I just gave it sharp edges, in some cases using the selection tool. In the future, I'd like to rely on that less, but for this time, it's fine. And in the end, I think the edges turned out pretty well. Another thing that I really like is the skin of the neck, the coloring and the values that I added to the neck. I think in contrast to this very polygonal face, to me, this looks like a neck, and it looks like actually grayscale skin to me. And I'm not saying it's amazing, but I think my technique with blending these colors together has improved. It felt much more simple, and I did that and sort of the shading underneath the chin quite quickly. So that made me happy, and the same is true of the top of the head. I think I did a pretty decent job blending, not perfect, but I'm kind of getting the hang of it a little bit. So I think the big thing that I need to accept, that I need to learn, and I need to learn to accept, is that while I'm trying to work on improving my workflow and understanding this process of art, there's really no such thing as cheating, and there's really no right or wrong. I see using the selection tool right now as cheating, but that's not necessarily true. And while I want to continue to improve my efficiency and being able to translate my ideas to the paper, as long as you're happy with as long as you're having fun with the process and you're happy with the outcome, then that's all there is to worry about. So with that said, I do want to continue to improve my technique so I can be more efficient and then put down my ideas into the picture that I'm working with. So I think one of the big struggles as a beginner right now is knowing what I want to put onto the paper, knowing what I want to put into this painting, but not knowing the process and not knowing the right steps that I need to take to get there. So I don't have a good vision of how to approach a piece. So I'd like to continue to improve that. But on the same note, I think this is why it's important to force yourself to complete projects. You grind through a project, and it's only when you get to the end of it that you can look back and start to reflect on what did I do well and what can I improve on. So for this week, I know I need to improve on my proportions, and that gives me a clear way forward. So maybe I don't know all the answers of how to put a painting together from start to finish, and I'm still working on, eventually I'll have my own styles and things like that. As long as you start something and you finish it, when you get to the end, you will have learned something. And that, I think, is what's going to propel me forward, and perhaps what will propel everybody forward. So that's my painting for the week. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see where this journey takes us. So thanks, bye.